today in the FIDE World Cup. The second games of the first round were played, so that meant at the end of today many players had already left the tournament. Now I'd like to take you through the match between Cori, 24 years old, from Peru, rated 2676, a former prodigy, against Nihal Sarin, 15 years old and an actual prodigy. So Nihal is already rated over 2600, but 2610, so still a fair bit behind his opponent. Nevertheless, Nihal won the first game of the match. Very nice positional win. So that meant that going into this game, Cori knew that he was in a must-win situation. He had to win this game in order to level the scores and go into the tiebreak. So let's see what happened. Cori with the white pieces. Now he's playing fairly modest opening at the moment. Of course, in this position, d4 is the normal move here. And then bishop d3, standard queen's pawn opening. But he played b3 and did a queenside fianchetto first. You can still play d4 and bishop d3 here with a pretty standard Zuckertort opening, or well, a kind of Queen's Indian Zuckertort. But he played more modestly, bishop e2. Now, for someone in a must-win situation, interesting strategy. You know, he's just playing a bit of cat and mouse here, but you know, it's not the most aggressive way for white to play. And I like Nihal's setup here very much, with the bishop on d6, bishop on b7, that pawn on a6 preventing knight b5. So you can see that black's bishops are, well, at least the bishop on d6 is more actively placed than white's equivalent on e2. So it's almost as though black is playing with the white pieces here. Nevertheless, it's a pretty standard position. And in fact, Nihal has had this before in St. Petersburg at the end of 2018, and his opponent Andreev played queen c2, which is pretty normal, connecting the rooks. Rook c1, also very reasonable move. But Cori played a4 here very quickly. An interesting idea. So he wants to play a5. For example, queen e7, normal move, a5. So obviously that's not very good because of c5. And you can see that could be rather annoying for black. So Nihal fought for over 20 minutes here and came up with c5, which looks like a very reasonable move to me. And one idea is simply that if this pawn advances to a5, then it can just be captured. It's covered by the queen. I mean, maybe exchanging pawns in the middle first, but basically you can take the pawn on a5. And that seemed to stump Cori. His big strategy had met its match somehow, and he thought for 15 minutes and came up with h3. I have to say, I'm not particularly a fan of this move, h3. I mean, one way for white to play this, I think, and potentially to use that pawn on a4, is to take here and go back to queen c2. And later on, it might be nice to play the bishop back round here. This is a potential idea. Block out that bishop on d6 and put the bishop on g2. That's possible. I mean, it's not also, not necessary to play queen c2 in that position. You could simply play rook e1 here and go for bishop f1 and g3. And you can see that that bishop will look at d5, and yes, it blocks out the bishop on d6. But after h3, well, okay, let's see how the game progresses, but it's difficult to do that kind of thing. And Nihal also not entirely sure what he's doing at the moment, playing h6. I'm not very keen on that. I mean, it's not a bad move. It doesn't have the same consequences as White's decision to play h3. So Cori has just nudged the bishop back. But it's not the same, because in this case, if you play g3, exchange and play g3, then you can see that the g3 pawn isn't well protected because the pawn has come to h3. And that means that here, White always has to be a little bit careful. The queen has to stay, on d1 or e2 in order to protect that knight on f3. Otherwise, there'll be an exchange in the middle and bishop takes knight, damaging the pawns. So I think this whole plan of rook e1 and bishop f1 in combination with the pawn move h3, actually, I'm not very keen on. Nevertheless, we can't speak in terms of an advantage for black yet. Okay, I mean, if we just look at the two sides, I think we can see that black's pieces are far more harmoniously placed, actually. I like this move very much, rook d8, opposite the queen. So, always tactics when the position opens. So, understandably, Cori played the queen to e2. Again, if queen, for example, you'd like to play to a1 behind the bishop, but, black would simply take here and take here. What happens if the pawns are exchanged in the middle? I mean, obviously, this kind of thing has been on for the past, five or six moves. Well, you can see that black's pieces are beautifully lined up here. Maybe this knight will switch around, knight e4 will come. And, yeah, black just has a really active position. So Cori just waits. He nudges the queen out of the way, queen e2, but it's an awkward square, of course, blocking in the bishop. And Nihal exchanges on c4, and now knight f8. So this one is swinging round to the king side. It also means after this exchange, well, obviously it opens up this diagonal, but it means that White's pawns are a little bit inflexible. You don't really want to exchange here because that'll isolate these pawns. d5 isn't really possible. So White always has to be careful about this exchange and then potentially the d pawn or the c pawn becoming weak. Rook b1 is a good move, however. Looking at the pawn on b6. So Cori has spotted something to aim for. And bishop c1 is important to cover the f4 square. Otherwise, after an exchange on d4, that knight has the potential to hop in here. So rook takes b6 threatened, therefore the queen comes over. And the queen actually very useful on this diagonal, as we'll see. Rook b2 with a little bit more pressure here. So pawns exchanged. And bishop a3. Right, now things are starting to happen. First, we should say rook takes b6 doesn't work because of bishop takes knight. And then bishop takes bishop. So the rook has to keep attacking this one. So yeah, and if rook b7, then yes, that one looks okay, doesn't it? So black is a piece up. So bishop a3, the rook has to move. Now, Cori played rook d2. In fact, rook c2 is a better move, and here's why. Because after this exchange, then the rooks protect each other. And although these pawns, in particular this d pawn, looks rather wobbly, in fact white is okay here, and it's to do with the fact that these pawns are a little bit vulnerable. For example, if bishop takes knight and rook takes d4, then c5 is a nice move, and that gives white really nice counterplay. If pawn takes pawn, then finally white's pieces make sense. Of course, in this position, black is certainly not obliged to exchange on f3. So, yeah, I mean, knight f4 is interesting. Oh, then queen e3, queen f4 is also possible. You know, that's dangerous. So, I mean, black certainly has some initiative there, but I think white is probably okay. But after bishop a3, rook d2 played, which feels like the most natural move because it's protecting that pawn. But watch what happens. After this exchange, queen f4 is a really unpleasant move for white to meet, and it's because of these rooks. It's just a very unfortunate position. So, for example, well, of course, white wants to switch back to attack the b pawn, but that's not possible. That rook hangs. Okay, well, what about the other rook? Okay, let's play rook b1. But then you take the knight, and if queen f3, queen takes d2, which leaves pawn takes f3, which is obviously absolutely dreadful, as white's king will be ripped open. So queen f4 played, and that is a very, very unfortunate move for white to have to face. Queen e3 played. Well, if the queens are exchanged here on e3, then white has complete salvation, but of course that's not going to happen. Bishop takes knight. And now, well, really white has to exchange queens and play this position. But this is very, very pleasant for black, obviously. With that beautiful knight on f4, these pawns have been shattered, and there is still potential to attack those hanging pawns as well. But this is white's best chance, and to try and attack these pawns somehow. But black is obviously better. But instead of exchanging queens, Cori just recaptured here straight away, and well, this was a gift. Queen h4, and now white's king is in absolutely dreadful trouble. Well, rook b1 was played here, which is, I think, nonchalant beyond belief. White has to switch pieces round with knight e2 to, you know, try and cover the king side. But no, rook b1, and the knight came in, and well, this is just suicidal from white. White takes on b6, knight e4. Again, you've got to get some pieces over. But rook takes b6, and now rook takes c4, and that is absolutely fatal. So basically, white is getting chopped from both sides of the board here. If bishop takes rook, then this one isn't too difficult to spot. The queen comes down. Another check. And knight g2. Thank you very much. Queen is in the bag. Let's go back. So rook takes c4 just played. King h2. And the knight came in. Very simple. And after this, white resigned. Well, hardly surprising. With this simple knight fork. Well, very convincing win by Nihal Sarin, who goes through the first knockout round. It's the first time he's played in the World Cup, and that is a big achievement just to get through. He's on a real high at the moment. It was announced on ChessBase India just a few days ago that he's just received or just signed a sponsorship deal with Akshaya Kalpa, who are an organic milk company based in Bangalore. And ChessBase India have estimated that Nihal Sarin is receiving upwards of $100,000 per year as sponsorship, which is quite an extraordinary sum of money. So well, added to this extraordinary talent, his capacity for hard work, and I have to say a superb temperament. When I've met him a few years ago, and he's very, very calm. Added to all those things, and now he has this really lucrative sponsorship deal, and well, I can imagine he's going to be getting training from some of the top trainers in the world, and boy, oh boy, he's going places. So watch out for Nihal Sarin. Let's see how he gets on in the next round. Thanks for watching.